They expected her to scream. They expected her to beg, to cry, to throw a vase against the wall. But when Matteo told Elisa he was trading her in for a younger model, she didn't make a sound. She simply packed her bags in terrified silence. Matteo and his mother laughed as the door clicked shut, thinking she was defeated, a nobody destined for the streets. They were wrong. Less than 4 hours later, a photo surfaced on Twitter that broke the internet. The quiet housewife wasn't crying in a motel. She was sitting at the most exclusive table in New York City, clinking glasses with a man so private and powerful that even Wall Street trembles at his name. And that silence. That was just the calm before the storm. The loudest sound in the penthouse apartment was the screech of packing tape being ripped across a cardboard box. It was a harsh tearing noise that seemed to echo off the marble floors and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray Seattle skyline. Elisa Vance smoothed the tape down over the flaps of the box. Her hands were steady, though her knuckles were white. She didn't look up. She didn't look at the panoramic view she had cleaned every day for 3 years. She didn't look at the man standing by the granite kitchen island swirling a glass of scotch. Nor did she look at the older woman sitting on the velvet sofa flipping through a magazine with feigned disinterest. "You're taking the coffee maker." Matteo laughed a sharp, incredulous bark. "Really, Elisa, I bought that for the house. It's a Breville. Put it back." Elisa didn't speak. She simply reached into the box, pulled out the stainless steel machine, and set it on the counter with a soft thud. Then she sealed the box. "God, she's pathetic," Linda Matteo's mother muttered, turning a page. "Not even a fight. I told you, Matteo, she has no backbone. She knows she's nothing without you. That's why she's leaving like a mouse." Matteo took a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning Elisa's figure. She was wearing faded jeans and a simple gray sweater. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She looked tired but efficient. "I'm doing you a favor, Elle," Matteo said, his voice dropping to that condescending tone he used when he explained finances to her. "Chloe is moving in on Monday. It wouldn't be right for you to be here. She's different. She needs the space. She's young, vibrant. She fits the brand image I'm building." Matteo was the CEO of Vantage Tech, a mid-level startup that had recently seen a massive influx of capital. With the money came the ego, and with the ego came the desire to shed the starter wife. Technically, they weren't married. Elisa had been his partner for 7 years, supporting him when he was coding in a basement, paying the bills with her waitressing tips. But he never bought a ring. He always said it wasn't the right time. Now the time was right for Chloe, a 22-year-old Instagram model who Matteo met at a launch party in Miami. "You have an hour," Matteo said, checking his Rolex. "The cleaners are coming to sterilize the place. I don't want any trace of your clutter left behind." Elisa moved to the hallway. She had 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. That was it. 7 years of life reduced to the trunk of a sedan. "Where will you even go?" Linda asked, peering over her reading glasses. "Back to that trailer park in Ohio. Or are you going to beg for your old job back at the diner? I hear they're hiring dishwashers." Elisa paused. She stood by the heavy oak door, her hand on the brass handle. For a second, the air in the room grew heavy. Matteo stepped forward, expecting a retort, perhaps hoping for one so he could have the satisfaction of crushing her verbally one last time. Elisa turned her head slightly. She looked Matteo dead in the eye. Her expression wasn't sad. It wasn't angry. It was totally, terrifyingly blank. It was the face of someone who had already mourned the death of a relationship years ago and was just now attending the funeral. She opened the door. "Goodbye, Matteo," she whispered. It was barely audible. Then she walked out. The door clicked shut with a finality that made Matteo flinch. "Good riddance," Linda scoffed, throwing the magazine onto the table. "Finally, we can breathe in here." Matteo stared at the door, a strange knot forming in his stomach. He shook it off. He was rich, he was young, and he was free. "Yeah," he said, turning back to his scotch. "She's gone. And she's never coming back." He had no idea how right he was. It was raining when Elisa stepped onto the curb. The Seattle drizzle was cold seeping into her sweater, but she didn't feel it. She hailed a cab, not an Uber. She didn't want to use the account linked to Mateo's credit card, and the yellow car screeched to a halt. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, eyeing her meager belongings. Elisa took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a burner phone she had bought with cash 2 days ago. She looked at a text message that had been sent to her that morning. It contained a single address. "Take me to the private airfield in King County," she said softly. The driver raised an eyebrow in the rearview mirror. "The airfield you catch in a charter looks like you're dressed for the bus station, no offense. Just drive, please." The ride took 40 minutes. Elisa spent the time staring out the window watching the city blur. She wasn't crying. She was calculating. Mateo thought she was a simple waitress he had saved. He thought her silence was submission. He didn't know about the emails. He didn't know about the project she had been working on every night while he was asleep, the coding patches she had fixed for his competitors under a pseudonym. And he certainly didn't know about Johnny. When the taxi pulled up to the private terminal, the driver's jaw dropped. Parked on the tarmac, gleaming under the floodlights, was a Gulfstream G650ER. It was matte black, sleek, and looked like a predator waiting to pounce. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was a man in a tuxedo holding a large umbrella. That's for you," the driver stammered. Elisa handed him a $100 bill. "Keep the change." She stepped out into the rain, but before a drop could touch her, the man with the umbrella was there. "Ms. Vance," the man said with a slight bow. "Mr. Sterling is waiting inside. He was concerned the traffic might have delayed you." "I'm here, Alfred," Elisa said, her voice stronger now. "Load the boxes, but be careful with the blue one. It has the hard drives." "Understood." Elisa walked up the stairs and ducked into the cabin. The interior smelled of expensive leather and bergamot. Sitting in a cream-colored swivel chair reviewing documents on a tablet was a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble. He had silver-streaked dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and an aura of power that sucked the oxygen out of the room. This was Johnny Sterling. To the public, he was a myth, a venture capitalist who had funded half of Silicon Valley in the 90s and then vanished into the shadows. He didn't give interviews. He didn't have social media. He was the money behind the money. He was the man Elon Musk called when he needed advice. He looked up as Elisa entered. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "You left him," Johnny stated. It wasn't a question. "I did," Elisa replied, sinking into the seat across from him. "Did you sign the NDA he tried to force on you?" "No, I left it on the counter, along with the ring he bought for the mistress." Johnny closed his tablet. "Good. Then you are a free agent." He signaled to the stewardess, who immediately brought a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. "We have a reservation at Per Se in New York in 5 hours. I took the liberty of having a wardrobe sent to the plane. You cannot dine with me wearing that." Elisa looked down at her sweater. "Mateo said I looked like a maid." "Mateo is a fool who is about to lose 40% of his company's market share due to a patent infringement he doesn't even know exists yet," Johnny said calmly. "But tonight isn't about business, Elisa. It's about the debut." "Are you sure about this, Johnny?" Elisa asked, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. "Once we step out there, once we are seen, there is no going back. Mateo will know. Everyone will know." Johnny leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Elisa, you spent 7 years hiding your brilliance to make a small man feel big. You ghost-wrote his code. You designed his architecture. You built his empire while he took the credit and treated you like a servant. It is time the world sees who the real architect is." He poured the champagne. The bubbles danced in the crystal flute. "Besides," Johnny added, a dangerous smirk playing on his lips, "I have heard the risotto at Per Se is excellent this time of year, and I have arranged for a specific photographer to be present. One who sells to TMZ, The Shade Room, and Daily Mail simultaneously." Elisa took the glass. The fear in her chest began to dissolve, replaced by a cold, burning fire. She thought of Mateo's laugh. She thought of Linda's sneer. "To silence," Elisa said, raising her glass. "To the storm," Johnny corrected. They clinked glasses as the jet engines roared to life, lifting them away from the rain and toward a vengeance that would be served not just cold but globally viral. The Gulf Stream touched down at Teterboro Airport just as the sun was beginning to set over the Manhattan skyline, painting the city in hues of burnt orange and violet. Inside the cabin, the transformation was complete. Elisa stood before the full-length mirror in the jet's private stateroom. She hardly recognized the woman staring back. The worn gray sweater and jeans were gone, replaced by a gown that cost more than Mateo's car. It was a midnight blue velvet dress off the shoulder, hugging her figure with a sophistication she had forgotten she possessed. It didn't just fit, it armored her. A team of stylists flown in from Paris on Johnny's dime had spent the last 2 hours on her hair and makeup. Her chestnut hair was no longer in a messy bun, but cascaded in soft, glossy waves down one shoulder. Her makeup was subtle but sharp, a smoky eye that highlighted the amber flecks in her irises and a deep crimson lip that signaled danger. "You look," Johnny said, his voice coming from the doorway, "like you own the city." Elisa turned. Johnny had changed as well. He wore a bespoke tuxedo cut perfectly to his broad shoulders, no tie the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. He looked effortless, the kind of wealthy that doesn't need to shout because the silence speaks for itself. Around his wrist was a Patek Philippe watch that was likely one of only 5 in the world. "I feel like an imposter," Elisa admitted, her hand trembling as she touched the diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "Johnny, 3 hours ago I was packing a toaster into a cardboard box. Now I'm wearing diamonds. Mateo used to say I looked best in sweatpants because fancy didn't suit my station." Johnny walked over to her. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was electric. "Mateo wanted a servant, Elisa. He wanted someone small so he could feel tall. Tonight we are going to show him exactly how small he really is. You are not an imposter. You are the woman who wrote the algorithm that saved his supply chain logistics last year. I checked the metadata. I know it was you." Elisa's eyes widened. You checked the code. I check everything." Johnny smiled a wolfish, confident grin. "I don't invest in people unless I know their value. And you, Elisa Vance, are undervalued. Tonight is the IPO." They descended the stairs of the plane to a waiting Rolls-Royce Phantom. The ride into the city was smooth, the interior of the car silent as a tomb. Elisa watched the lights of New York flicker past. She felt a strange sense of dissociation, as if the woman in the window wasn't her, but a character she was playing. The Avenger. The car pulled up to the Time Warner Center at Columbus Circle. Per se, Thomas Keller's legendary restaurant was their destination. But as the car slowed, Elisa saw the lights. Flashes. Dozens of them. A swarm of photographers was gathered near the entrance. "Did you tell them we were coming?" Elisa whispered, panic rising in her throat. "I may have leaked a tip that Johnny Sterling was dining with a mystery partner regarding a hostile takeover," Johnny said nonchalantly. "The financial press is here. The tabloids followed. They think you're a business mogul from Europe. Or royalty. Let's not disappoint them." The chauffeur opened the door. The noise of the city rushed in, sirens honking and the sudden aggressive shouting of the paparazzi. "Mr. Sterling over here. Johnny, who's the girl? Look this way." Johnny stepped out first. The flashes went crazy, illuminating the night like lightning. He buttoned his jacket calmly, then turned and extended his hand into the dark interior of the car. Elisa took a breath. "Goodbye, Mouse. Hello, Storm." She took his hand and stepped out. The silence that followed was momentary but palpable. The photographers paused for a fraction of a second, stunned by the sheer elegance of the woman standing next to the elusive billionaire. Then the shutters went into overdrive. Click, 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 click. Elisa didn't look down. She didn't hide her face. She remembered Mateo's mother calling her pathetic. She lifted her chin, her expression cool and detached, channeling every ounce of pain into a look of regal indifference. She looked straight into the lens of the closest camera, her eyes piercing. Johnny placed a hand on the small of her back, protective, possessive, and intimate. He leaned in close to her ear, a move that the cameras ate up. "Walk slow," he whispered. "Let them get the shot. This is the photo that will ruin him." They walked the gauntlet. To the onlookers it looked like a romantic secret being unveiled. To Elisa it felt like walking through fire and coming out unburnt. They entered the building, leaving the chaos behind them, but the damage was already done. The images were beaming up to satellites, bouncing off servers, and landing on the screens of millions. Inside, per se, the atmosphere was hushed reverence. The maitre d' bowed low. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Vance, your table is ready." They were seated by the window overlooking Central Park. The meal was a 9-course tasting menu of oysters and pearls and butter-poached lobster, but Elisa barely tasted it. Her adrenaline was spiking. "Why are you doing this?" she asked midway through the meal, swirling her wine. "I know you respect my coding, Johnny, but this, the dress, the paparazzi, the jet, this is personal. You're attacking Mateo." Johnny set his fork down. His face grew serious, the playfulness vanishing. 6 years ago, Johnny said quietly, Mateo's company acquired a small startup called Bluestream. They stripped it for parts, fired the staff, and bankrupted the founder. The founder committed suicide 3 months later. Elisa gasped. "I remember Bluestream. Mateo said they were incompetent. The founder was my younger brother." Johnny revealed, his voice ice cold. "I was away in Singapore, disconnected. By the time I came back, it was too late. I have been watching Mateo ever since, waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting for a weakness." He looked at Elisa, his eyes softening again. "I didn't expect his weakness to be the fact that he was throwing away the genius behind his success. When I found out you were the one writing the patches and that he was dumping you, the stars aligned, Elisa. I get to avenge my brother, and I get to help you reclaim your life. We are partners in this crime." Elisa stared at him. The narrative shifted. She wasn't just a charity case. She was the weapon. "So," Elisa said, a slow smile spreading across her face, the first genuine smile she had shown in weeks. "How do we destroy him?" Johnny raised his glass. "Check your phone. I believe step 1 is already trending. 3,000 miles away in Seattle, the sun was just coming up." Mateo groaned as he rolled over in bed. His head was pounding from the celebration drinks he'd had the night before. Next to him, Chloe was sprawled out, snoring lightly. The room smelled of her cheap perfume and stale vodka. He sat up, rubbing his temples. The apartment felt different. It was messier. Elisa used to wake up at 600 a.m. to make fresh coffee and organize his schedule. Chloe had left her thong on the lampshade and spilled makeup powder on the nightstand. Whatever Mateo thought, small price to pay for freedom. He reached for his phone on the charger. He expected a few emails from his team, maybe a text from his mom. Instead, his lock screen was full. 47 missed calls, 102 text messages, Instagram 99 plus notifications. "What the hell?" Mateo muttered, squinting at the screen. The first text was from his VP of sales, a guy named Brad who usually only texted about golf. "Brad dude, tell me that's not Elisa. Tell me you didn't just fumble the bag of the century." The second text was from his mother. "Mom, call me now." Why is she with him? Mateo unlocked the phone, a pit forming in his stomach. He opened Twitter X. The first thing on his For You page was a picture. It was high resolution, taken under the flashing lights of New York City. A man in a tuxedo looking like a god with his hand on the back of a woman in a midnight blue velvet dress. The woman was looking at the camera with eyes that could cut glass. She looked expensive. She looked powerful. She looked breathtaking. It was Elisa. Mateo blinked. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. It had to be a deepfake. That was Elisa. The woman who wore oversized t-shirts and clipped coupons for groceries. The woman he had just kicked out because she was too plain. She was standing next to Johnny Sterling. Mateo stopped breathing. He knew who Johnny Sterling was. Every tech CEO knew who Johnny Sterling was. He was the Reaper. He was the man who could buy and sell Mateo's company 10 times over before breakfast. Mateo read the caption on the tweet posted by PopCrave, at PopCrave elusive billionaire Johnny Sterling spotted at Per Se in NYC tonight with a stunning mystery woman. Insiders say she's a brilliant strategist. He's been courting for months. The internet is already calling them the new power couple. Johnny Sterling, mystery woman, #NYC. The tweet had 120,000 likes. Mateo's thumb trembled as he scrolled down to the comments. At CryptoKing99. Wait, isn't that Mateo Vantage's girl? The one from Seattle at Tech Insider, replying to at CryptoKing99. Nope. Mateo announced he was single yesterday. Rumor is he dumped her for an influencer. Looks like she upgraded. Majorly. At Slay Queen LMFAO. She packed her bags and went straight to the top of the food chain. We stan. At InvestBro. Johnny Sterling doesn't date. He invests. If he's with her, she's heavy hitter. Who is she really? Mateo felt like he was going to throw up. He shook Chloe awake. Babe, wake up! He hissed. Chloe groaned, smacking her lips. What? It's early. Look at this. He shoved the phone in her face. Chloe squinted, then her eyes widened. Who is that? She's gorgeous. Is that the old lady you lived with? She's not old. Mateo snapped, suddenly defensive. She's 29. She looks like a movie star, Chloe said, sounding jealous. Who is the guy? Is he rich? He's a billionaire, Chloe. He's the billionaire. Mateo threw the phone onto the duvet. He paced the room, running his hand through his hair. This doesn't make sense. She has no money. She has no connections. She took a cab to the airport. How did she get to New York? How does she know Johnny Sterling? His phone rang again. It was his mother. He answered on speaker. Mateo? Linda's voice was shrill. Have you seen the news? It's on Daily Mail. They're calling her the Cinderella of Silicon Valley. They're saying you held her back. People are digging up your old interviews where you didn't mention her. Mom, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. You told me she was a nobody. You said she was going back to the trailer park. Why is she wearing a $50,000 necklace? I don't know, Mateo screamed back. Well, you better figure it out, Linda warned. Because people are starting to talk. They're saying she was the brains behind Vantage Tech. Someone on Reddit just posted a thread comparing her old GitHub commits to your source code. Mateo, did she write the code? Mateo froze. The blood drained from his face. He had always told everyone he wrote the core algorithm. It was the foundation of his reputation. But the truth was, when he was stuck, when the logic broke, when the database crashed, he handed the laptop to Elisa. She would fix it in an hour while he played video games. He never credited her. He never paid her. He just bought her dinner and told her she was a good helper. Mateo, his mother asked, her voice dropping. Did she write it? She helped a little. Mateo stammered. Oh my God, Linda whispered. If Sterling knows that, if she tells him. Mateo hung up. He looked at the panoramic window, the view he was so proud of. Suddenly the apartment felt very small. He ran to the living room, to the spot where Elisa had stood yesterday. He looked for anything she might have left behind. A note. A clue. He found nothing but the empty space where the coffee maker used to be. He opened his laptop and frantically tried to log into the administrative backend of Vantage Tech. He needed to check the logs. He needed to make sure she hadn't taken anything. He typed in his password. Access denied. He typed it again. Access denied. A prompt appeared on the screen. System alert. Unauthorized access attempt. Your administrative privileges have been revoked by the root user. Root user, Mateo whispered. I am the root user. Then a small terminal window popped up on his screen. Green text on a black background. It wasn't a glitch. It was a message. Hello, Mateo. You kept the apartment. I kept the keys to the kingdom. E. Mateo stared at the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. She hadn't just left. She hadn't just upgraded. She had locked him out of his own company. And she was currently eating breakfast with the one man who had the money and the legal team to make sure Mateo never got back in. Mateo slumped into his expensive leather chair, the silence of the apartment now deafening. For the first time in his life, he realized he wasn't the main character of this story. He was just the villain in her origin arc, and the hero had just leveled up. The desperate flight from Seattle to New York was nothing like the private jet experience Elisa had enjoyed. Mateo flew coach middle seat back row near the bathroom because his corporate credit cards had been frozen. The bank had flagged suspicious activity the moment the news of the administrative lockout hit the financial wires. By the time Mateo landed at JFK, he was sweating disheveled and running on pure panic. He had left Chloe back in Seattle. The moment she realized the credit cards were declining at the airport Starbucks, she had hailed an Uber and told him to call her when he was rich again. Mateo didn't care. He had one goal: find Elisa Charm, her apologize and get the password to unlock his company. He convinced himself it was just a tantrum. Elisa was soft. She was the woman who cried during dog food commercials. She wouldn't actually destroy him. She just needed to hear him say he was sorry. He knew where she would be. Tech Weekly had tweeted the agenda for the Innovators Ball at the Met Gala venue that night. Johnny Sterling was the keynote speaker, and according to the press, his mystery muse would be by his side. Mateo spent his last few $100s on a rented tuxedo that didn't fit quite right in the shoulders and a scalp ticket he bought off a shady forum on the dark web. The Met was glowing. Cameras flashed, red carpets rolled, and the air smelled of money and exclusivity. Mateo flashed his ticket, his heart pounding, and pushed past security. He entered the great hall, his eyes darting around the room filled with tech moguls, celebrities, and politicians. And then he saw her. She was standing near the Temple of Dender, illuminated by soft golden lighting. She was wearing a new dress, emerald green silk that flowed like liquid water, backless, exposing the smooth skin he used to take for granted. She was laughing at something a senator was saying, holding a champagne flute with an elegance that made Mateo's chest ache. Johnny was next to her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a silent sentinel. Mateo straightened his bow tie, took a shot of whiskey from a passing waiter's tray to steady his nerves, and marched over. "Elisa!" he called out, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The conversation in the circle died instantly. The senator looked annoyed. Johnny looked bored. Elisa just looked at him. "Mateo," she said. Her voice was cool, stripped of the warmth he was used to. "You're trespassing." "Trespassing?" Mateo laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Babe, come on! I flew across the country. We need to talk. Privately." He reached out to grab her arm, a reflex from 7 years of ownership. Before his fingers could graze her skin, Johnny's hand shot out. He didn't shove Mateo. He simply clamped his hand around Mateo's wrist. His grip was like a steel vise. "Do not," Johnny said, his voice low and terrifyingly calm, "touch her." Mateo winced, trying to pull his hand back, but he was immovable. "This is between me and my wife, Sterling." "I'm not your wife, Mateo," Elisa said, stepping closer. She wasn't shrinking away. She was looming. "I was your girlfriend of 7 years. I was your maid. I was your cook. And apparently I was your chief technology officer, though I never saw a paycheck." "Elisa, please," Mateo hissed, aware that people were starting to stare. iPhones were being raised. The cameras were recording. Not here. Look, I made a mistake with Chloe. It was stupid. I was stressed. But you locking the system, that's illegal. You're hurting the company. Our company. Our company. Elisa raised an eyebrow. Interesting phrasing. When you sold 10% of the shares last month to buy your mother a beach house, you told me the company was solely your burden. When you accepted the Innovator of the Year award, you thanked your barista but not me. Now it's ours. I built Vantage, Mateo shouted, losing his composure. I did the marketing. I got the investors. You sold the shell, Elisa corrected him, her voice raising just enough to carry across the silent hall. I built the engine. You don't even know what language the core processor is written in, do you, Mateo? Mateo stammered. It's Python. Obviously. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It's written in Rust, Mateo, Elisa said, pity dripping from her tone. I migrated the entire back-end 6 months ago because the Python script you copied from a forum in 2018 was leaking user data. The crowd gasped. A tech CEO not knowing his own stack. That was a death sentence in this room. You're lying. Mateo spat sweat dripping down his forehead. You're a waitress. You served pancakes at Denny's before I saved you. You think these people respect you? They're laughing at you. You're just Sterling's flavor of the week. The room went dead silent. Johnny released Mateo's wrist with a shove that sent him stumbling back. Johnny adjusted his cuffs, his face stone cold. She is not my flavor of the week, Johnny announced, his voice projecting to the rafters. She is my partner, and as of this morning she is the primary consultant for Sterling Ventures. We are launching a new cybersecurity firm next week. The flagship product is an algorithm that detects IP theft. Ironically, we tested it on your company, Mateo. Johnny pulled a folded document from his tuxedo pocket and tossed it at Mateo's feet. You've been served, Johnny said. Mateo stared at the papers on the floor. What is this? A lawsuit? Elisa said, her eyes blazing. For intellectual property theft, fraud, and breach of implied contract. I'm not just leaving you, Mateo. I'm taking back my brain. Security guards materialized out of the shadows. Sir, you need to leave, one of them said, grabbing Mateo's arm. No, she's lying. She's crazy, Mateo screamed as he was dragged away, his heels skidding on the polished floor. I made you, Elisa. You're nothing without me, nothing. Elisa watched him go, her expression unreadable. When the doors slammed shut, the silence lingered for a second. Then slowly the senator began to clap. Then Johnny. Then the room erupted in applause. Elisa looked at Johnny. He winked. Showtime, he whispered. But Elisa knew the real battle wasn't at the party. It was going to be in court. Mateo was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. He wouldn't just roll over. He would try to burn her down, even if he had to burn himself with her. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere in the Superior Court of Washington was suffocating. The press dubbed it the divorce of the decade, even though they were never married. It was a battle of narratives, the self-made tech bro versus the hidden female genius. Mateo's legal team was aggressive. They were expensive sharks funded by the last of Mateo's dwindling investors who were desperate to salvage the company. Their strategy was simple: discredit Elisa. Paint her as a scorned ex-girlfriend who was vindictive and delusional. Elisa sat at the plaintiff's table next to Johnny's team of corporate litigators. She wore a sharp white suit, a visual contrast to the gray and black of the courtroom. She looked like a CEO. On the witness stand, Mateo looked better than he had at the gala, but his eyes were hollow. He had been coached. Ms. Vance had access to my computer, yes, Mateo testified smoothly. She often used it to shop online or play games. I suspect she installed a keylogger to lock me out as revenge for our breakup. The idea that she wrote the code for Vantage is absurd. She has no formal education in computer science. She is a high school graduate who worked in food service. Mateo's lawyer, a man with an oily smile named Mr. Sterling, no relation to Johnny, much to everyone's amusement, stood up. So, to be clear, Mr. Vantage, you are the sole author of the source code. I am. Mateo lied. I wrote every line. And Ms. Vance? She made the coffee. Mateo smirked. A few of his supporters in the back chuckled. Elisa didn't flinch. She scribbled something on a notepad and slid it to her lead attorney, a razor-sharp woman named Rebecca. Rebecca stood up for the cross-examination. She didn't pace. She didn't shout. She walked to the center of the room and plugged her laptop into the courtroom's projector. Mr. Vantage, Rebecca began, you claim you wrote every line of code. That is a statement under oath. Are you aware of the penalties of perjury? I know what I wrote, Mateo said defiantly. Excellent. Then you can explain this. Rebecca hit a key. The projector screen lit up with blocks of complex code. It was the kernel of Vantage Tech's logistics engine. This is Exhibit C, Rebecca said, the source code you submitted to the Copyright Office 3 years ago. Can you talk us through lines 400 through 450? Mateo squinted. He started to sweat. It's a data sorting algorithm. Actually, it's a recursive loop for inventory management, Rebecca corrected. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the comments. Encoding programmers leave comments notes within the code that the computer ignores, meant for humans to read. Please look at line 412, Rebecca said. It appears to be a variable definition. The screen zoomed in. var favorite memory itsu 0712-216. What does this date mean, Mateo? Rebecca asked. Mateo froze. I don't recall. Random numbers. Elisa stood up. She didn't ask permission. She just stood. July 12, 2016, Elisa said clearly. It was the day we drove to the coast. It was raining. We ate clam chowder in the car because we couldn't afford a restaurant. You told me you were scared you'd never make it. I told you I would help you build it. Objection, Mateo's lawyer shouted. The witness is testifying. I'm not done, Elisa said, her voice cutting through the objection. Rebecca, execute the command. Rebecca typed a command into the terminal on the screen. Run private key, decrypt favorite memory. The courtroom held its breath. The code on the screen began to shift, the text scrambling and reassembling. It was a hidden function buried so deep inside the architecture that no standard audit would find it. The screen cleared and a single image appeared. It wasn't a logo. It wasn't a graph. It was a scanned image of a napkin, a greasy coffee-stained Denny's napkin. On the napkin, written in blue ballpoint pen, was a diagram of a database structure. The handwriting was looped and feminine, and at the bottom, signed in that same ink property of Elisa Vance. Happy birthday, Mateo. Use this to change the world. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. That, Elisa said, pointing to the screen, is the original architecture. I drew it for you on your 25th birthday because you couldn't figure out how to scale the servers. I scanned it and embedded it into the root directory as a digital watermark. I knew deep down that one day you might try to erase me, so I signed my work. Mateo's face was the color of ash. He slumped in the witness chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Mr. Vantage, the judge spoke, peering over his glasses. Is that your handwriting? No, Mateo whispered. Is that Ms. Vance's handwriting? Mateo looked at Elisa. He looked at Johnny, who was watching him with the cold indifference of an executioner. He looked at the jury, who looked disgusted. Yes, Mateo admitted, his voice cracking. And did you know this file was embedded in the software? No. Then you didn't write it, the judge concluded simply. The gavel didn't bang yet, but the sound of Mateo's career shattering was loud enough for everyone to hear. Johnny leaned over to Elisa. Checkmate, he murmured. Elisa didn't smile. She just felt a massive weight lift off her chest. She looked at Mateo, small and defeated in the big wooden chair. She didn't feel triumph. She felt relief. But the story wasn't over. Mateo had lost the company, but there were still secrets he was hiding. darker secrets involving the money he had secured from overseas investors, investors who were not as forgiving as the American judicial system. As the bailiff moved to recess the court, the doors at the back of the room banged open. Two men in dark suits entered. They weren't lawyers, and they weren't police. They were FBI. "Mateo Vantage," one of the agents called out, flashing a badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud and money laundering involving the Cayman Islands accounts." Elisa turned to Johnny, shocked. "You knew about the laundering." Johnny adjusted his tie. "I told you, Elisa. I check everything." The heavy oak doors of the Superior Court of Washington swung open, and the world exploded into noise. Elisa Vance stepped out onto the granite staircase, and for a moment she was blinded. The camera flashes were relentless, a stroboscopic storm of white light that turned the gray Seattle afternoon into a chaotic premiere. But this wasn't a movie premiere, it was a public execution of a reputation. To her left, the media mob surged against the metal barricades. Reporters were shouting over one another, a cacophony of questions that merged into a singular roar. "Elisa, is it true you controlled the back end for 3 years? Mateo, look this way. Did you defraud the investors?" "Ms. Vance, are you taking over Vantage Tech?" Elisa didn't answer. She stood tall in her white suit, a beacon of calm amidst the frenzy. Next to her, Johnny Sterling was an anchor, his presence dark and formidable. He didn't shield her, he didn't need to. He simply stood beside her, letting the world see that they were equals. But the cameras quickly shifted their focus. Behind them, flanked by 4 federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI, was Mateo Vantage. He looked nothing like the arrogant tech mogul who had sneered at Elisa in their penthouse weeks ago. The bespoke Italian suit he wore was rumpled. His tie was loose. His face was a mask of shock, pale and sweating. But the most jarring detail was the silver handcuffs binding his wrists behind his back. As the agents guided him down the stairs toward a waiting black SUV, the crowd went wild. "Mateo!" a reporter from CNBC yelled, shoving a microphone toward him. "The SEC is claiming $40 million in laundered funds through shell companies in the Caymans. Do you have a comment?" Mateo looked up. His eyes frantically scanned the crowd, looking for a friendly face, looking for an exit. They landed on Elisa. For a heartbeat, time seemed to suspend. Mateo stopped walking, forcing the agents to tug at his arm. He looked at the woman he had discarded, the woman he had called a mouse. He looked at the diamonds around her neck and the man standing beside her. In that look there was no anger. There was only a terrifying, hollow realization. He hadn't just lost a girlfriend. He hadn't just lost a company. He had lost the very architect of his existence. "Elisa," he mouthed. The sound was swallowed by the noise of the crowd, but she saw the shape of his lips. Elisa didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply watched him with the detached curiosity one might have when observing a car crash on the highway. "Keep moving!" the lead agent barked, shoving Mateo's head down to protect him as they shoved him into the back seat of the vehicle. The heavy door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Elisa's bones. The SUV peeled away, sirens wailing, cutting a path through the sea of press. "You knew," Elisa said softly, her voice barely audible over the shouting reporters. She didn't look at Johnny. She kept her eyes on the taillights of the retreating SUV. "You knew the FBI was coming today." Johnny adjusted his cufflink, his expression unbothered. Mateo was sloppy, Elisa. Arrogance makes men careless. He used the same password for his illegal offshore accounts that he used for his Netflix login. When you unlocked the system with that napkin scan, you didn't just prove ownership of the code. You opened a window into his entire digital soul. I simply ensured the window was facing the Department of Justice. He turned to her, his blue eyes sharp and serious. "He stole your mind, Elisa. It was only fair that he paid with his freedom." The weeks that followed were a blur of destruction and rebirth. The collapse of Vantage Tech was swift and brutal. It was a case study in corporate implosion that business schools would teach for decades. With the CEO indicted on 12 counts of wire fraud and money laundering, and the revelation that the core IP belonged to an ex-partner, confidence in the company evaporated overnight. The stock, which had traded at $145 a share, plummeted to $0.12 in pre-market trading the following Monday. Elisa watched it all from a distance. She saw the news footage of employees walking out of the headquarters carrying cardboard boxes, an ironic echo of her own departure. But unlike her, they had severance packages. Matteo had nothing. Karma, however, wasn't finished. It had one more stop to make. 3 weeks after the arrest, a video surfaced on TikTok that went viral within hours. It was filmed by a neighbor in an upscale suburb. The shaky footage showed a tow truck backing into a driveway, Linda Vantage's driveway. Linda, Matteo's mother, was screaming. She was wearing a silk robe, clutching a Louis Vuitton bag as if it were a life preserver. "You can't take it!" Linda shrieked at the repo man who was hooking chains to the axle of her white Mercedes. "My son is Matteo Vantage. Do you know who he is? He owns this city." "Lady," the repo man said, looking tired, "your son owns a jail cell. The bank owns the car. Step back." As the car was hoisted into the air, Linda turned to the person filming. "Stop filming. We are good people. She did this. That waitress did this." The video ended with Linda sitting on the curb weeping into her hands. Elisa watched the video on her tablet in the quiet of her new living room. She expected to feel a surge of triumph. Linda had tormented her for 7 years, belittling her family, mocking her clothes, treating her like hired help. Seeing her humbled should have felt like victory. Instead, Elisa just felt done. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, empty space where she could finally build something new. She closed the video. "Goodbye, Linda," she whispered. 6 months later. The elevator doors opened onto the 40th floor of the newly constructed Sterling Vance Tower in downtown Seattle. The space was breathtaking, an open-concept cathedral of glass and steel bathed in natural light. It didn't smell of fear or ego. It smelled of potential. Elisa walked through the bustling office. Dozens of engineers, many of them women she had personally recruited, looked up and nodded with respect as she passed. They weren't afraid of her. They were inspired by her. She reached her corner office, a space 3 times the size of Matteo's old penthouse living room. The desk was made of reclaimed timber, sleek and modern. On the wall behind it, framed in simple black wood, was the original Denny's napkin. It was a reminder. Never forget where you started. Never let anyone erase your name. She sat down and opened her laptop. The beta results for Aegis, their new AI-driven cybersecurity platform, were incredible. They had already secured contracts with 3 major banks and a defense contractor. The company was projected to hit $1 billion valuation before the end of the fiscal year. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Elisa glanced at it. It was a number she had deleted, but one she still recognized. Unknown number L. "Please, I know you blocked my other number. I'm using a burner phone a guard smuggled in." Elisa stared at the screen. She should delete it, but curiosity, that old ghost, made her open the message. Unknown number. "The trial starts next week. They're offering a plea deal, but it's 15 years L. 15 years. I'm scared. Chloe sold a story to TMZ about me being abusive. Mom won't answer my calls because she's living in a motel and blames me. I have nobody." Unknown number. "I just wanted to say, you were right. About the rain. About the chowder. That was the best day. I should have married you then. I'm so sorry. Can you help me?" Just a character reference. Anything. Elisa read the words. She felt the ghost of the girl she used to be. The girl who would have dropped everything to save him. The girl who packed boxes in silence because she thought she deserved the pain. But that girl didn't live here anymore. Matteo didn't want forgiveness. He wanted a lifeline. He was drowning, and he was reaching for the only person who had ever learned how to swim in his chaos. Elisa typed a response. Her fingers hovered over the keys. "I forgive you." She looked at the words, then she backspaced. I hope you find peace. She backspaced again. She realized she didn't need to say anything. Her silence had been her exit. Her silence had been her weapon. And now her silence was her final answer. She selected the message thread. Delete. Block caller. She set the phone down just as the office door opened. Johnny walked in. He looked different than he had in the beginning. The sharp, predatory edge of the Wolf of Wall Street had softened into something warmer, something more collaborative. He was holding a bottle of vintage Krug and 2 crystal flutes. The Asian markets just closed, Johnny said, a grin spreading across his face. Aegis is up 40%. The IPO is oversubscribed by a factor of 10. Elisa, we're not just a unicorn, we're a dynasty. He placed the glasses on her desk and popped the cork. The sound was a sharp, festive pop that signaled the end of the old era. Elisa stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Seattle lay spread out below her, a grid of lights twinkling in the twilight. Somewhere down there in a concrete cell, Mateo was sitting in the dark. Somewhere down there, Linda was learning to live with less. But up here, the air was clear. Johnny walked up beside her. He handed her a glass. He didn't try to touch her or claim the moment for himself. He simply stood with her, looking out at the empire she had built with her own mind. You know, Johnny said quietly, they're calling you the Iron Queen in the press. They say you came out of nowhere. Elisa swirled the champagne, watching the bubbles rise. Let them talk. I like the noise. To silence, Johnny asked, raising his glass, a callback to the toast they had made on the jet when she was broken and fleeing. Elisa shook her head. She turned to him, her eyes bright with a fire that would never be extinguished again. No, Johnny, she said, her voice steady and strong. To never being silent again. They clinked glasses, the crystal chiming like a bell. Outside, the city lights burned bright, but inside the office, Elisa Vance burned brighter. She had packed her things in silence, yes, but she had unpacked a revolution. And that is the story of how Elisa Vance packed her things in silence and made the whole world listen to her roar. She proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting the loudest, but the one who knows where all the bodies, or in this case the code, are buried. Mateo learned the hard way that you should never underestimate the person who builds your empire for free. What do you think of Elisa's revenge? Was it too harsh, or did Mateo get exactly what he deserved? Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and corporate takedowns, please smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs a little inspiration, and hit subscribe so you never miss the next drama-filled saga. Until next time. Most people think the loudest part of a divorce is the screaming. They expect shattered vases, thrown wedding rings, and threats shouted across a courtroom. But they are wrong. The most dangerous part of a divorce is the silence. When Mark Vance handed his wife Elise the divorce papers, he expected a war. He expected her to fight for every cent of the empire he thought he built. Instead, she picked up a pen, signed her name without looking up, and walked out. Mark thought he had won. He thought she was weak. He had no idea that her silence wasn't a surrender, it was a countdown. And when that countdown hit 0 on the tarmac of Teterboro Airport, Mark was about to learn that some ex-wives don't leave with alimony. They leave in a Gulf Stream. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Vance & Compey building smelled of stale coffee and expensive leather, a scent that Elise had grown to detest over the last 5 years. Outside, the New York City skyline was gray and weeping rain against the glass, matching the somber mood of the lawyers gathered around the mahogany table. Or rather, the mood Elisa's lawyers were supposed to have. Mark sat at the head of the table, checking his Rolex Daytona every 30 seconds. He tapped his fingers on the glass surface, a nervous tic he had developed whenever he felt he was the smartest person in the room. Next to him sat Tiffany, his executive assistant, though everyone in the tri-state area knew she was the reason they were sitting here today. She was wearing a dress that was inappropriate for a legal proceeding and scrolling through Instagram bored. Let's go over this one last time. Mark's lawyer, a pit bull of a man named Sterling Archer, no relation to the agency, just an unfortunate coincidence of ego, slammed a thick binder shut. Elise, you are waiving your right to the primary residence in the Hamptons. You are waiving your claim to the stock options in Vance Logistics. You are accepting a one-time cash settlement of $50,000 and retaining ownership of the 2018 Honda Civic. Is that correct? Elise sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple beige cardigan and minimal makeup. To Mark, she looked exactly like the woman he had married 6 years ago, a quiet, unassuming librarian he had met at a charity gala. He had chosen her because she was safe, because she looked at him with adoration, because she didn't ask questions when he stayed out late, closing deals. "That is correct," Elise said softly. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremors Mark had expected. Mark scoffed, a jagged sound that cut through the room. "Elise, really? You're not even going to fight for the dog, or the artwork." "I don't want the art, Mark. It's all modern prints you bought to impress your investors. They have no soul." Tiffany snickered, hiding her mouth behind a manicured hand. "Soul doesn't pay the bills, sweetie." Elise turned her gaze to Tiffany. It wasn't an angry look. It was the look a scientist might give a bacteria culture in a petri dish, mild curiosity mixed with pity. "No, Tiffany, it doesn't. But neither does Mark usually. The company has been leveraging debt for 3 quarters. I hope you're good at budgeting." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. Just sign the damn papers, Elise. I have a flight to catch. We're celebrating the IPO launch in Paris." "Ah, yes, the IPO," Elise said, picking up the heavy fountain pen. "Going public. The dream. You wouldn't understand high finance, Elise." Mark sneered, adjusting his silk tie. "You've spent the last 6 years organizing bookshelves and baking bread. You're lucky I'm generous enough to give you the 50 grand. Consider it severance pay for a mediocre marriage." Elise's lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Henderson, whom she had hired from a strip mall firm, looked like he wanted to object. Elise silenced him with a subtle touch to his forearm. "Mediocre," she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. "Okay, Mark." She uncapped the pen. The sound of the nib scratching against the paper was the only sound in the room. Scratch, scratch, scratch. She signed the divorce decree. She signed the non-disclosure agreement regarding the company's internal affairs. She signed away her claim to the penthouse, the cars, and the life she had supposedly built with him. She capped the pen and slid the papers across the mahogany table. "Done," she said, standing up. Mark grabbed the papers, checking the signature as if he expected her to have written "Go to hell" instead of her name. He grinned, a predatory showing of teeth. "Well, that was easier than I thought. I honestly expected you to cry." "I cried when I found out you were sleeping with Tiffany 3 years ago," Elise said, matter-of-factly gathering her purse. "I cried when you missed my mother's funeral to play golf. I don't have any tears left for this, Mark. I just have relief." Mark laughed, standing up and wrapping an arm around Tiffany's waist. "Relief? You're walking out of here a middle-aged divorcee with a Honda Civic and no job. I'm walking out a CEO about to ring the bell on Wall Street. But sure, you keep your relief." He tossed a set of keys across the table. They slid and fell off the edge, landing at Elise's feet. "The keys to the apartment. You have 24 hours to vacate. Tiffany wants to redecorate by Monday." Elise bent down, picked up the keys, and placed them gently on the table. "I moved out 3 days ago, Mark. The keys are yours." She turned and walked toward the door. "Hey, Elise," Mark called out, feeling the need for one last jab. "If you need a reference for a library job, let me know. I know people on the board." Elise paused at the door. She didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Mark. Enjoy Paris. I hear the weather is unpredictable this time of year." She walked out. "God, she's pathetic," Tiffany muttered, nuzzling into Mark's neck. She's history, Mark corrected. Come on, let's go to the airport. The world is finally ours. Teterboro Airport in New Jersey is the playground of the elite. It is where the 0.1% go to avoid the indignity of taking off their shoes at TSA checkpoints. However, even within Teterboro there are levels to the hierarchy. There are the charter flyers, people who rent a small Cessna or a Learjet for a few hours. Then there are the fractional owners, people who own a slice of a plane. And then there are the whales, the ones who own the heavy iron, the global 7500s, the Gulfstreams. Mark Vance felt like a king as he pulled his rented Cadillac Escalade up to the curb of the charter terminal. He wasn't a whale yet, but with the IPO launching next week, he felt like one. He had chartered a mid-sized Hawker 800 for the trip to Paris. It wasn't the biggest plane, and it would require a fuel stop in Iceland, but it was private. That was all that mattered. "Babe, look," Tiffany said, pulling down her sunglasses as they stepped onto the tarmac. Is that Elise?" Mark froze. He squinted against the harsh afternoon sun. About 50 yards away, standing near the entrance of the VIP lounge, was a woman. She was wearing a trench coat, dark sunglasses, and a silk scarf wrapped around her head, reminiscent of 1960s Hollywood royalty. But the posture was unmistakable. "It is," Mark muttered, confused. "What the hell is she doing here? Did she follow us?" "Maybe she's stalking you," Tiffany gasped, clutching his arm. "She wants to ruin our trip." Mark straightened his jacket. "Not on my watch." He marched over, dragging Tiffany and their Louis Vuitton luggage behind him. As he got closer, he saw Elise standing next to a pile of vintage leather travel trunks, the kind that cost more than a car. She was checking something on a sleek, transparent tablet. "Elise!" Mark barked. She didn't jump. She simply turned her head slowly, sliding her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. Her eyes were cool, amused even. "Mark, Tiffany, you made good time," she said. "What are you doing here?" Mark demanded, gesturing around the exclusive tarmac. "This is a private airport, Elise. The Greyhound bus station is in Newark." Tiffany giggled nastily. "I'm traveling, Mark, same as you," Elise said, tapping the screen of her tablet. "Traveling with what money?" Mark laughed incredulously. "I just gave you 50 grand. A charter flight to anywhere costs half of that. Are you blowing your entire settlement on one flight to, where, Florida?" "Actually, I'm heading to Europe as well," Elise said. "Europe?" Tiffany stepped in, looking Elise up and down. "Honey, you can't afford Europe. Not the way we do it. We're flying private. You're probably looking for the employee entrance to clean the bathrooms." Elise smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It didn't reach her eyes, but it sharpened her cheekbones. "I'm not flying charter, Mark," Elise said softly. "Oh, right," Mark mocked. "Did you find a sugar daddy already? Is that it? Some old geezer taking you for a spin?" "No," Elise said. "I don't need a daddy. I have a brother." Mark paused. "You don't have a brother. You told me you were an only child from a farm in Nebraska." "I told you I was raised on a farm in Nebraska," Elise corrected. "I never said I was an only child, and I never said whose farm it was." Suddenly a deep rumbling sound shook the tarmac. It wasn't the whining buzz of Mark's rented Hawker jet. It was the low, thunderous growl of massive Rolls-Royce Pearl 700 engines. A shadow fell over them. Mark looked up. Taxiing around the corner of the hangar was a beast. It was a Gulfstream G700, the pinnacle of private aviation. It was sleek black with gold trim and longer than some commercial airliners. It was a $75 million machine designed to fly closer to the speed of sound than any other civilian jet. On the tail, painted in elegant gold script, was a crest Mark recognized but couldn't place. A lion holding a key. "Whose plane is that?" Tiffany whispered, her eyes wide with greed. "That thing is massive." The massive jet turned and parked directly in front of them, dwarfing Mark's rented plane like a wolf standing next to a chihuahua. The stairs automatically unfolded with a hydraulic hiss. Two pilots in pristine uniforms descended the stairs, followed by a flight attendant holding a silver tray with a glass of champagne. They walked right past Mark. They walked right past Tiffany. They stopped in front of Elise. "Madam Chairwoman," the lead pilot said, bowing his head respectfully, "we are fueled and ready for departure to Paris-Le Bourget. Your brother, Lord Julian, is already on board waiting for you." Mark's jaw dropped so hard it practically hit the asphalt. "Madam Chairwoman," Mark stammered. Elise took the glass of champagne from the tray, took a delicate sip, and looked at Mark. "Oh, didn't I mention," she said casually, "my maiden name isn't Smith Mark. That was my mother's name. My father's name was Sterling, as in the Sterling Group." The color drained from Mark's face so fast he looked like a corpse. "The Sterling Group," he wheezed. The shipping conglomerate, the venture capital firm, and the private aviation manufacturer," Elise added helpfully, gesturing to the jet behind her. "We actually built the engine components for that little plane you rented. You're welcome." Tiffany looked between them, panic setting in. "Mark, what is she talking about? Is she rich?" "Rich?" Elise laughed, a genuine melodious sound. "Tiffany, Mark has about $4 million in assets, most of it leveraged debt. The Sterling Group's quarterly coffee budget is $4 million. She handed her empty glass to the attendant and signaled for her bags to be loaded. The ground crew moved with a speed and efficiency that Mark had never seen. They treated her trunks like holy relics. You lied to me," Mark whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "For 6 years you pretended to be a nobody. You let me pay the mortgage. You let me buy you that cheap car." "I didn't lie, Mark." Elise's voice dropped, turning icy. "I omitted. I wanted to know if a man could love me for me, not for the billions my family controls. I wanted a life where I wasn't the Sterling heiress. I wanted to be just Elise. And for a while I thought we had that." She took a step closer to him. He flinched. "I helped you, Mark. Who do you think introduced you to the logistics partners in China? Who do you think got your loan approved at Chase when your credit score was 580? I made a few calls. I pulled a few strings from the shadows. I built you up because I thought we were a team. You fixed the China deal." Mark looked like he was going to be sick. That deal was the cornerstone of his company. "I created the China deal," she corrected. "And now that I'm no longer your wife, I imagine the board of directors at Sterling Logistics, specifically my brother Julian, might reevaluate their partnership with a small volatile firm like Vance & Co." "You can't do that," Mark gasped. "The IPO. If we lose the China contracts, the IPO is dead in the water. I'll be ruined." Elise adjusted her sunglasses. "You should have thought about that before you brought your mistress into my home, Mark. You broke the contract of our marriage. I'm just adjusting the other contracts." She turned toward the massive black jet. "Wait, Elise." Mark lunged forward, but a large security guard who had materialized from the plane stepped in his path. The guard didn't say a word, just crossed his massive arms. Elise walked up the stairs. At the top, she turned back one last time. "By the way," she called out over the roar of the engine starting to spool up, "enjoy the Hawker. I hear the seats in that model don't fully recline. It's going to be a long flight." She stepped inside and the door sealed shut with a heavy final thud. Mark and Tiffany stood on the tarmac, the wind from the Gulfstream's engines whipping their clothes as the massive jet began to taxi. "Mark," Tiffany whined, tugging on his sleeve. "Does this mean we aren't going shopping in Paris?" "Shut up, Tiffany!" Mark screamed, staring at the black jet as it turned onto the runway. He watched as it picked up speed, defying gravity, and shot into the clouds, taking his future, his fortune, and his ex-wife with it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Then it buzzed again. Then it started ringing. He looked down. It was his CFO. This is it, Mark thought. The beginning of the end. The interior of the Gulfstream G700 was quieter than a library and more opulent than most five-star hotels. The cabin was pressurized to a lower altitude than commercial jets, meaning the air felt fresh, not recycled. The seats were upholstered in hand-stitched cream leather, and the cabinetry was crafted from rare mahogany that gleamed under the warm ambient LED lighting. Elise sank into a club seat that immediately adjusted to her body temperature. She let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 6 years. The trembling started in her hands not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. "Here," a deep, resonant voice said. Elise looked up. Julian Sterling, the current CEO of the Sterling Group, and her older brother placed a glass of aged whiskey on the side table. Julian was 38, with the kind of sharp, aristocratic features that made him a regular on the cover of Forbes and GQ. He was wearing a casual cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Mark's entire wardrobe. "I told you I didn't need alcohol, Jules," Elise said, though she picked up the glass. "It's not for the need. It's for the celebration," Julian said, sitting opposite her. "The papers, they are signed." Elise nodded, taking a sip. The amber liquid burned pleasantly, going down. "Signed, sealed, and delivered. I am officially divorced. I walked away with $50,000 in a Honda Civic." Julian let out a dark, incredulous laugh. $50,000 for the woman who personally redesigned the supply chain algorithms that saved his company $3 million last year. He got a bargain. "He thinks he won," Elise said, looking out the large oval window as the earth fell away beneath them. "He thinks I'm destitute. He even offered me a job reference." Julian's eyes narrowed. The protective brother in him flared up. "I can crush him, Elle. You know that. I can make one phone call to the SEC, one call to the IRS. I can have him auditing paper clips in a federal prison by Tuesday." Elise shook her head slowly. "No, that's too easy. Prison is a punishment for criminals. Mark isn't a criminal. He's a narcissist. To punish a narcissist, you don't take his freedom. You take his audience. You take his status. You let him climb to the very top of the mountain, and then you kick the ladder away." She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a slim, secure laptop. "Is the IPO still scheduled for Tuesday morning?" she asked. "Yes," Julian confirmed. "Vance & Company is set to debut on the NASDAQ. The opening price is projected at $28 a share. If it holds, Mark will be worth about $40 million on paper." "And the valuation?" Elise typed quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard, "is based almost entirely on the exclusive logistics contract with the Brown Corporation in Shanghai. Correct?" "Correct. 90% of his revenue stream comes from shipping Brown electronics to the U.S. market." Elise stopped typing. She looked at Julian. "And who owns the shipping containers that Brown uses?" Julian smiled. It was a wicked smile. "Sterling Maritime." "And who insures the cargo?" "Sterling Insurance." "And who holds the debt regarding the fuel credits for his transport fleet?" "Sterling Capital." Elise closed the laptop with a satisfying click. "Mark built a house of cards, Julian, but he forgot that he built it on our land. Initiate Protocol 0. Julian raised an eyebrow. 0. That's the scorched earth policy, Elle. Are you sure it will cost us a few million in broken contract fees?" "Do it?" Elise said, her voice hard. "The contract for his logistics support has a moral turpitude clause. It states that if the principal leadership engages in behavior that damages the reputation of the partners, the contract can be voided immediately." "He cheated on his wife." Julian shrugged. "It's sleazy, but is it enough to trigger the clause?" "It is when the wife he cheated on is a primary shareholder of the parent company he relies on," Elise said. "Send the notice. Time it for exactly 9:35 a.m. on Tuesday, 5 minutes after he rings the opening bell." Julian pulled out his phone. "It will be a pleasure." The flight attendant reappeared with a plate of truffled risotto. "Madam Captain says we have a strong tailwind. We'll be in Paris an hour ahead of schedule." Elise leaned back, closing her eyes. Good. I need to go shopping. If I'm going to destroy my ex-husband, I need a new dress. Paris was raining, but it was the kind of romantic cinematic rain that makes the cobblestones glisten. Mark Vance didn't notice the romance. He was too busy screaming at the concierge of the Hotel Plaza Athénée. "What do you mean, declined?" Mark shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "Run it again. It's a platinum card." The concierge, a man with infinite patience, sighed. "Monsieur Vance, we have run it 3 times. The bank has put a hold on the card. Perhaps you would like to use another." Tiffany, standing behind him in a fur coat she had made him buy at the airport duty-free, rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Mark, this is embarrassing. Just use the company card." "I can't use the company card for personal expenses 2 days before the IPO. The auditors are watching everything," Mark hissed at her. He eventually found a debit card that worked, depleting his personal savings account to secure the suite. They went up to the room, the mood sour. "Don't worry, babe," Mark said, popping a bottle of champagne from the minibar, which he would have to pay for later. "In 48 hours, none of this matters. I'll buy the hotel." Tuesday morning arrived with a nervous energy. Because of the time difference, the New York Stock Exchange opened at 3:30 p.m. Paris time. Mark had rented a private conference room at the hotel, set up with multiple screens to watch the launch. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch. Tiffany was wearing a glittering red dress, scrolling through her phone looking for mentions of herself in the press. 5 minutes to open," Mark said, pacing. "This is it. The ticker is VANC." On the large center screen, the CNBC broadcast showed the floor of the stock exchange. The commentators were talking about the day's IPO. Small but aggressive logistics firm Vance & Co. debuting today. Analysts are bullish, largely due to their ironclad monopoly on the brown distribution route. "Hear that?" Mark pointed at the screen. "Ironclad. That's me. I'm the Iron Man of logistics." The bell rang. The trading began. Vanc opened at $28. Within seconds, it jumped to $32. "Yes!" Mark punched the air. "We're up! We're flying!" He grabbed Tiffany and kissed her aggressively. "I'm rich! I'm filthy rich!" At 9:34 a.m., New York time, the stock hit $35. At 9:35 a.m., a notification flashed on the bottom of the CNBC screen. "Breaking news: Sterling Group severs all ties with Vance & Co." Mark froze. "What?" The news anchor stopped mid-sentence. "Wait, we have breaking news coming across the wire. The Sterling Group, the multinational conglomerate, has just issued a press release. They are immediately terminating all shipping insurance and credit line agreements with Vance & Co., citing breach of contract and leadership instability." "What?" Mark screamed, dropping his glass. It shattered on the floor. "They can't do that. We have a contract." On the screen, the graph for Vanc stopped climbing. It hovered for a terrifying second. Then it fell off a cliff. $35, $28, $20. "This is catastrophic," the anchor said, her voice rising in excitement. "Without the Sterling infrastructure, Vance & Co. has no ships, no containers, and no insurance. They are effectively paralyzed. The Brown Corporation has also just tweeted that they are suspending operations with Vance pending an investigation. 15, 10. "Stop it! Stop trading!" Mark yelled at the TV as if the traders could hear him. He scrambled for his phone, dialing his CFO. "Peter, what is happening? Stop the bleeding." "I can't." Peter's voice was hysterical on the other end. "Sterling pulled the credit line, Mark. The bank just called the loan. They want the $40 million immediately. We're insolvent. We're bankrupt." $5. $2. In 10 minutes, Mark Vance went from being worth $40 million to being worth negative $40 million. The stock was halted for volatility, but the damage was done. The company was a smoking crater. Mark sank into the chair, staring blankly at the screen. It's a mistake. It has to be a mistake." He looked up at Tiffany. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at him with pure disgust. You said you were worth 40 million, she said, her voice cold. It's a glitch, Tiff. We'll fix it. I just need to call Elise. She knows people at Sterling. Wait. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I have a brother, Madam Chairwoman. Protocol 0. She did this, Mark whispered. Elise did this. Tiffany stood up. She grabbed her purse. Where are you going? Mark asked. Out, Tiffany said. Babe, I need you. I need you to help me think. Help you? Tiffany laughed. Mark, look at the TV. You're broke. Worse than broke, you're in debt. I don't do debt. But we're a team, Mark stammered. We were a team when you were a CEO, Tiffany said, walking to the door. Now you're just a loser in a tuxedo you probably can't afford to dry clean. Tiffany, Mark chased after her. You can't leave me. I paid for this trip. I bought you that dress. She turned at the door. Consider it severance pay for a mediocre affair. She slammed the door. Mark was alone. The silence in the hotel room was deafening. On the TV, the red arrow pointed down, down, down. His phone rang. It wasn't his CFO this time. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it slowly. Hello. Hello, Mark. It was Elise's voice, clear, calm, and utterly victorious. Elise, he croaked. You destroyed me. I merely balanced the books, Mark, she said. I told you I was good at budgeting. Why? He sobbed. Why go this far? You could have just divorced me. I did divorce you, Elise said. But you insulted my intelligence. You insulted my family. And worst of all, you tried to make me feel small so you could feel big. I just wanted to show you Mark. There is always a bigger fish. I'll sue you, Mark screamed. I'll sue the Sterling Group. With what money? Elise asked. Your lawyers just resigned. I know because I just hired them. There was a pause. Check your email, Mark, she said. There is a one-way ticket back to New York. Economy class. Middle seat. It leaves in 3 hours. I'd suggest you take it. The hotel manager is coming up to evict you in about 5 minutes. Elise, wait. Please. I still love you. Mark tried the desperation leaking out of him. Elise laughed. It was the last time he would ever hear that sound. Goodbye, Mark. The line went dead. 3 months had passed since the crash of Vance & Co. The scandal had been the talk of Wall Street for weeks. Then it faded as all scandals do, replaced by the next big failure. Mark Vance was currently living in a studio apartment in Queens. He had sold the Rolex. He had sold the car. He was working as a junior consultant for a trucking firm, a job he got only because his old college roommate took pity on him. But Mark hadn't given up. He was obsessed. He spent his nights reading articles about Elise Sterling, heiress to the Sterling Empire, announces new philanthropic initiative. Elise Sterling spotted at Milan Fashion Week. Elise Sterling to host the Winter Solstice Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The gala. That was his chance. Mark convinced himself that if he could just see her, if he could just talk to her face to face without lawyers or phones, he could charm her back. He could explain that he had changed. He could get access to the money again. He spent his last $1,000 renting a tuxedo and bribing a caterer to get him a staff pass for the event. The Metropolitan Museum was transformed into a winter wonderland. White roses covered every surface. The elite of New York were there, senators, movie stars, tech moguls. Mark, wearing a waiter's jacket he had stolen from the cloakroom over his tuxedo shirt, moved through the crowd carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes to blend in. His eyes scanned the room frantically, and then he saw her. She was standing at the top of the stairs near the Temple of Dendur. She looked breathtaking. She was wearing a midnight blue velvet gown that hugged her curves with diamonds dripping from her ears and neck diamonds that were real heirlooms of the Sterling family. She wasn't alone. Standing next to her with a hand possessively on the small of her back was a man. He was tall with broad shoulders and a rugged, intense jawline. He wasn't a soft, corporate type like Mark. He looked dangerous. He looked like a wolf in a suit. Mark recognized him instantly. Everyone knew him. Damon Salvatore. No, that was a vampire. This was Damon Wolf, the CEO of Wolf Industries, a rival to the Sterling Group in size but far more aggressive. He was known as the Corporate Raider. He destroyed companies for sport. And he was looking at Elise like she was the only woman in the world. Mark felt a surge of jealousy so hot it almost blinded him. He abandoned his tray on a statue and marched up the stairs. Security was lax near the VIPs because they assumed everyone there belonged. "Elise," Mark called out, his voice cracking. The conversation around them stopped. The music seemed to fade. Elise turned. When she saw him, her expression didn't change. She didn't look scared. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. "Mark," she said, "I didn't know the caterers were allowed to mingle with the guests." "I need to talk to you," Mark said, stepping closer, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd. "Alone." Damon Wolf stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He just moved his body between Mark and Elise. He towered over Mark. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Is this the ex-husband?" Damon asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Mark's chest. "He is," Elise said, placing a calming hand on Damon's arm. "Damon, this is Mark. Mark, this is Damon." "I know who he is," Mark spat. "Elise, please. I've changed. I'm living in Queens. I'm suffering. Haven't you punished me enough? I'm your husband." "Ex-husband," Damon corrected. "We had something real," Mark pleaded, reaching for her hand. Damon caught Mark's wrist in midair. He didn't twist it. He just held it. His grip was like a steel vise. Mark gasped in pain. "Touch her again," Damon whispered, "and you won't need a lawyer. You'll need a surgeon." "Let him go, Damon," Elise said softly. Damon released him with a shove. Mark stumbled back, rubbing his wrist. "Mark," Elise said, stepping forward so she was looking down at him on the stairs. "You aren't suffering because I punished you. You are suffering because for the first time in your life you have to work for what you get. You are living the life you actually earned." "I can be better," Mark cried. "Give me another chance. Not as a husband. Give me a job. Any job. I know the logistics systems. I can help you." The crowd was watching. Phones were out. This was being live-streamed. Elise sighed. "You want a job?" "Yes, please," Mark begged. Elise looked at Damon. "Darling, didn't you say your warehouse in New Jersey was looking for night shift staff?" Damon smirked. "We are. Minimum wage. Heavy lifting, no benefits for the first year." Elise turned back to Mark. "There you go. Go to the Wolf Industries warehouse in Newark on Monday at 6 a.m. Ask for the foreman. Tell him Elise sent you." You want me to be a box packer?" Mark stared at her, horrified. "It's honest work, Mark," Elise said. "It builds character, and God knows you need some." She turned her back on him. "Security, please show this guest out. He's upsetting the vibe." Two massive guards appeared instantly, grabbing Mark by the arms. "Elise, you can't do this! I was a CEO!" Mark screamed as they dragged him away, his feet scraping against the marble floor. Elise didn't look back. She took Damon's arm. "Shall we dance?" she asked. "We shall," Damon said, leading her onto the floor. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Mrs. Sterling." "Ms. Sterling," she corrected with a smile. "And don't worry, you have nothing to fear, as long as you're loyal." 6 months later. The winter in Newark, New Jersey was not just cold, it was a physical assault. It was the kind of damp industrial freeze that ignored coats and settled directly into the marrow of your bones. Mark Vance stood on the concrete loading dock of Wolf Industries Distribution Center, Sector 4. The wind whipped off the Passaic River, carrying the smell of diesel fumes and freezing rain. He was shivering violently, but not just from the cold. He was shivering from exhaustion. He wore a neon orange safety vest that was 2 sizes too big, thrown over a gray hoodie he had bought at a thrift store. His hands, once manicured and soft from years of handling nothing heavier than a Mont Blanc fountain pen or a crystal whiskey tumbler, were now unrecognizable. They were raw, chapped, and covered in small cuts from endless cardboard edges. His fingernails were broken. His knuckles were swollen. "Vance, what are you doing dreaming about your glory days?" The voice cracked like a whip. It was Kowalski, the night shift foreman. Kowalski was a man the size of a vending machine who took a specific sadistic pleasure in managing a former CEO. He knew exactly who Mark was. Everyone did. I'm wrapping the pallet, Kowalski," Mark stammered, his breath puffing out in white clouds. "The plastic roll. It got stuck." "You're too slow, Vance," Kowalski sneered, stepping closer. He smelled of stale tobacco and onions. "Truck 402 is leaving in 8 minutes. If this load isn't secured, you're docked an hour's pay. And considering your wages are currently being garnished for 3 different lawsuits, I don't think you can afford to lose a dime." Mark grit his teeth. He wanted to scream. He wanted to fire this man. He wanted to call security. But he had no security. He had no power. He grabbed the heavy roll of industrial plastic wrap and began to circle the pallet of toilet seat covers. Round and round. He pulled the plastic tight, the friction burning his palms. He was dizzy. He hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. After the rent for his basement studio in Queens, the court ordered restitution payments to his former creditors, and the surprise child support for a daughter he had ignored for 10 years who suddenly needed college tuition, Mark was living on instant ramen and tap water. Round and round. He was the Iron Man of logistics, wrapping toilets for minimum wage. A loud buzzer sounded, echoing through the cavernous warehouse. 3:00 a.m. Lunch break. The workers shuffled toward the break room like zombies. Mark followed them, keeping his head down. He didn't talk to the other workers. They knew he was the guy who crashed a company and lost $40 million in a day. They didn't pity him. They loathed him. The break room was a grim box with fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects. There were 4 vending machines, but 2 were broken, and the other 2 only took cash. Mark didn't have cash. He walked over to the water cooler, filled a paper cup, and sat at the metal table in the back corner. On the wall, mounted high up near the ceiling, was a dusty flat-screen television. It was always tuned to the Global Business Network GBN. Most of the workers ignored it, preferring to stare at their phones. But for Mark, it was a form of self-flagellation. He couldn't stop watching the world he used to rule. "Hey, turn that up," one of the forklift drivers shouted to the guy near the remote. "They're talking about the bonus checks." The volume increased. Mark looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty sleeve. The screen wasn't showing the warehouse bonus structure. It was showing a live feed from Zurich, Switzerland. The banner at the bottom of the screen pulsed with urgent red letters, "Live, the merger of the Century press conference." Mark felt his stomach drop. The camera panned over a stage that looked more like a coronation than a business meeting. The backdrop was a massive digital wall displaying the new company logo, a stylized wolf intertwined with a golden key. And there they were. Seated at a sleek glass table were 2 figures who looked like gods compared to the tired gray men in the break room. Damon Wolf sat on the right. He wore a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, looking every inch the predator he was known to be. He looked dangerous, relaxed, and utterly in control. On the left sat Elise. Mark stopped breathing. She was radiant. She wore a white structural suit with a plunging neckline adorned with a single massive sapphire necklace. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She didn't look like the librarian anymore. She didn't look like the nice wife who baked bread. She looked like an empress. Truly a historic moment, the British news anchor narrated. The finalized merger between the Sterling Group and Wolf Industries has created the largest logistics conglomerate in human history. Their combined market cap as of this morning sits at $150 billion. A collective whistle went through the break room. "Damn," the forklift driver muttered. "That's a lot of zeros." Mark felt bile rise in his throat. That should have been him. If he had just held on, if he hadn't cheated. But the real story today, the anchor continued, is the unveiling of their proprietary technology. They are calling it the Athena Protocol. Analysts are saying this AI-driven system will revolutionize global trade, predicting supply chain disruptions before they even happen. Mark froze. The plastic cup in his hand crushed inward. Athena. He knew that name. Years ago, back when he and Elise were first married, he had toyed with an idea. He wanted to build an algorithm that used weather patterns and political news to reroute ships automatically. He had called it Project Hermes. He had worked on it for months, but the code was too complex. He was a salesman, not a coder. He had abandoned it, assuming the files were lost when he switched laptops. On the screen, a reporter from the Financial Times stood up to ask a question. "Ms. Sterling," the reporter asked, her voice echoing in the silent warehouse break room. "The Athena Protocol is being hailed as the holy grail of shipping. It's estimated to save the industry $400 billion in waste over the next decade. Did you hire an external firm to build this code?" Elise smiled. It was a slow, terrifyingly confident smile. She leaned into the microphone. "No," she said, her voice crystal clear. "I wrote the core architecture myself." Mark blinked. "She wrote it. I started writing it 7 years ago." Elise continued, looking directly into the camera lens. "I was living in a small apartment in Manhattan. My husband at the time, well, he was often out late. Working," he said. A ripple of laughter went through the audience in Zurich. "So, to pass the lonely hours, I coded," Elise said. "I took his initial flawed concept, Project Hermes, and I fixed it. I expanded it. I perfected it. But I never told him. I knew he wouldn't understand the complexity. And frankly, I knew he would try to sell it before it was ready." "So you hid it," the reporter pressed. "Where do you hide a billion-dollar algorithm?" "I kept the only copy of the source key on an encrypted external hard drive," Elise explained. "And I kept that hard drive in the one place I knew my husband would never, ever look. A place he considered beneath him." The reporter leaned in. "And where was that?" Elise's eyes danced with amusement. "In the glove box of my 2018 Honda Civic." The silence in the break room was deafening. Mark felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him dizzy and cold. The Civic. The memory hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He was back in the conference room. The rain was hitting the window. His lawyer, Sterling Archer, was reading the terms. "Elise, you are waiving your right to the primary residence. You are accepting a one-time cash settlement and retaining ownership of the 2018 Honda Civic. Is that correct?" He remembered his own voice dripping with arrogance and disdain. "You're not even going to fight for the dog or the artwork." He remembered laughing at her. He remembered thinking she was pathetic for wanting that old dented car with the coffee stain on the passenger seat. "Oh my God," Mark whispered. His hands were shaking so badly he knocked his water over. He fumbled for his pocket, pulling out his cracked Android phone. His thumb slipped on the screen as he frantically searched his email archives. Search divorce decree. Final. PDF. He found it. The document was dated 6 months ago. He opened it, pinching the screen to zoom in on the fine print. He scrolled past the alimony waiver. He scrolled past the property division. He found Section 4, Paragraph C, asset allocation. He read the words, and they blurred through his tears. The party of the second part. Elise Vance shall retain sole ownership of the 2018 Honda Civic VN, ending in 5592, including all mechanical parts, accessories and contents contained within the vehicle at the time of signing. Contents contained within. It was a standard clause. A throwaway line lawyers used so couples wouldn't sue each other over forgotten sunglasses or gym bags. But in this case, contents contained within referred to a hard drive worth $400 billion. Mark dropped the phone. It clattered onto the dirty linoleum floor. He hadn't just lost the company. He hadn't just lost the wife. He had literally signed away the keys to the kingdom. He had handed her the weapon she used to conquer the world, and he had done it with a smirk on his face. On the TV, the interview was wrapping up. "Ms. Sterling," the reporter asked one final question. "Is there anyone you would like to dedicate this success to? Perhaps a mentor?" Elise paused. She looked at Damon Wolfe. Damon took her hand, squeezing it supportively. The power dynamic was clear. They were partners equals. "Actually, yes," Elise said. "I'd like to thank my ex-husband, Mark." The workers in the break room turned to look at Mark. He couldn't move. He felt like he was burning alive. "He taught me the most valuable lesson of my life," Elise said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. "He taught me that arrogance is a blinder." He was so busy looking at himself in the mirror that he never bothered to look in the glove box. "He taught me that if you underestimate the quiet ones, you don't just lose the game, you lose everything." She smiled one last time. "Thank you, Mark. I couldn't have done it without your signature." The feed cut to the stock ticker. Sterling Wolfe, swell F up, 400%. "Hey, Vance." Kowalski kicked the break room door open. "Break is over. Get your ass back on the line. We have 3 more trucks to load before sunrise." Mark looked at the foreman. He looked at the other workers who were now whispering and pointing at him, realizing exactly who he was and what he had done. The humiliation was total. It was absolute. Mark let out a sound. It wasn't a cry. It was a laugh. A broken, jagged, hysterical laugh that sounded like glass shattering. "I signed it," he wheezed, rocking back and forth. "I gave her the car. I gave her the car." "What is wrong with you?" Kowalski barked. "Move!" Mark stood up slowly. His legs felt like lead. He walked past his phone, leaving it on the floor. He walked out of the break room back into the freezing cold warehouse. He walked back to the pallet of toilet seats. He picked up the heavy roll of plastic wrap. Round and round. He started wrapping. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of the plastic stretching was exactly the same as the sound of his fountain pen on the day he signed his life away. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the world was silent. The Gulfstream G700, the flagship of the newly formed Sterling Wolfe aviation fleet, cut through the stratosphere at Mach 0.925. The cabin was dim lit only by the soft amber glow of the LED strips along the floor. Elise Sterling sat in the master suite, her legs curled under her. She had changed out of the power suit and into a silk robe. In her hand she held a glass of 1982 Petrus. She was looking out the window, watching the curvature of the earth. The sun was setting behind them, casting long purple shadows across the cloud tops. The door to the suite opened softly. Damon walked in. He had loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar. He looked tired, but triumphant. "The board is ecstatic," he said, sitting on the edge of the plush leather seat opposite her. "The stock price is holding steady at $300 a share. We are officially the most valuable company in the sector." "Good," Elise said quietly. She took a sip of the wine. "And the logistics integration?" "Smooth," Damon said. "The Athena protocol is already online. It rerouted 20 ships away from a typhoon in the Pacific 10 minutes ago. We saved $6 million in fuel in the first hour." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He studied her face. "You know," he said, a small smirk playing on his lips. "That was cold, El. Thanking him on international television, that was brutal." Elise turned her gaze from the window to him. Her eyes were calm, devoid of the anger that had fueled her for so long. "He wanted to be famous, Damon," she said simply. "He always wanted to be a household name. I just gave him what he wanted." "I think he would have preferred the money," Damon chuckled. "He had the money," Elise replied. "He had the wife. He had the life. He threw it away for a 24-year-old assistant and an ego trip. Mark didn't lose his fortune today, Damon. He lost it 6 months ago when he decided that I was disposable. Damon reached out, taking her hand. His grip was warm and solid. Well, his loss is my gain. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Mrs. Sterling. Ms. Sterling, she corrected him, her fingers interlacing with his. And don't worry, you have nothing to fear, as long as you check the glove box. Damon laughed, a rich, genuine sound that filled the cabin. Point taken. Elise looked back out the window. Far below, under the layers of clouds and darkness, she knew Mark was there. He was likely freezing. He was likely tired. He was living the reality of the working class he had mocked for years. The scales of the universe had balanced perfectly. So, Damon said, pouring himself a glass of wine, we have the merger. We have the billions. We have the fastest jet in the world. What's next? Elise smiled. It wasn't the vengeful smile of a scorned woman anymore. It was the ambitious smile of a builder. Next, she said, clinking her glass against his. Next we buy the airport he's flying out of. I love the way you think, Damon whispered. To the quiet ones, Elise toasted. To the quiet ones, Damon replied. May they never be silenced again. The massive jet engines roared a deep, powerful hum that vibrated through the floor, pushing them faster, higher, leaving the past far behind in the cold, dark distance. And that is exactly why you never judge a book by its cover, and you definitely never judge a wife by her silence. Mark thought he was the king of the world because he had a loud voice and a fancy suit, but he forgot the golden rule of power: the person holding the pen holds the future. He didn't just lose his money, he lost his dignity, his legacy, and the billion-dollar idea he was too arrogant to see, all because he couldn't be bothered to look inside a Honda Civic. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many people are you overlooking right now? Who is the Elise in your life that you're underestimating? Because as Mark learned, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting threats. It's the one sitting quietly waiting for you to hand them the pen. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma and betrayal, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. And tell me in the comments below, if you were Elise, would you have given Mark a job, or would you have left him with nothing? I read every comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.